The last thing I heard wasn't the alarms. It wasn't the screams of the other passengers. It was the pilot's voice over the intercom. It wasn't an announcement. It was a scream of pure terror. He yelled, "Brace for impact!" But we weren't just falling. We were aimed directly at the mountain. The audio you're about to hear is what the investigators found. But they didn't tell you everything. I was there. I heard what happened after the microphone cut out. And what I saw in the snow, it changed. Everything. Before I reveal what really happened up there in the Rocky Mountains, stop for a second. Comment below. What city are you listening to this story from? I want to see how far my voice is carrying. To understand how I survived, you have to understand how it began. It didn't start with the scream. It started 3 hours earlier in Salt Lake City, with a lukewarm coffee and a lie I told myself. "It's just a short flight," I muttered. "Just 90 minutes and you're in Denver." My name is Mark Bishop. I'm 38 years old and I'm an architect, and I hate flying. It's not an irrational fear of falling. I don't care about the statistics. It's a fear of not being in control. My entire life is built on blueprints, on physics, on knowing that structural support A holds weight B, that the angles are precise. On an airplane, I am nothing. I am cargo. I am trusting my life, my family's future, to two people I've never met, in a machine maintained by people I'll never know, hurtling at 500 miles per hour through air too thin to breathe. That day, control was all I wanted. My small architecture firm was standing on the edge of a cliff. For 6 months, I had worked day and night on the Summit Project, a luxury hotel complex outside Denver. It was the project of my life, the kind of contract that could save my company or sink it completely. This meeting in Denver was the final presentation, my last shot. I was sitting in seat 26B, the last row. I always picked the last row near the galley, away from the engine noise. Or so I thought. It's easier to pretend you're on a bus if you can't see the curvature of the earth. I had my laptop open on the tray table, but the presentation file, I just couldn't look at it anymore. I had memorized every slide, every cost projection, every answer to every possible question. My wife, Elena, had told me to stop, to rest. "Mark, the project is perfect. You've got this. Just go be yourself." The takeoff was, normal. We climbed through the gray Utah clouds and into the bright, clear sun. For a moment, I actually relaxed. I closed my eyes. The steady drone of the cabin was almost hypnotic. I pictured the meeting. I pictured signing the contract. I pictured calling Elena and saying, "We did it. The hustle is over." But over the Rockies, everything changed. The first jolt was sharp. It wasn't the gentle, rolling turbulence I was used to. This was a hard, vertical slam, as if the plane had hit a giant pothole in the sky. My laptop slid off the tray and I caught it just in time. My coffee sloshed over my hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." His voice was calm, practiced. "We're encountering some unexpected turbulence as we cross the mountains. Should be out of it in about 15 minutes. Please make sure those seatbelts are securely fastened." 15 minutes. I could handle 15 minutes. But it wasn't 15 minutes. It got worse. The plane began to sway, sickening side-to-side motion. I could feel my stomach rising and falling. I looked out the window, but there was nothing to see. Just a dense, impenetrable wall of gray and white cloud. There was no horizon. No up, no down. It was like being inside a glass of milk that was being violently shaken. The man next to me, a heavy-set guy in a suit, was gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles were white. He was muttering under his breath. I pushed the call button above my head. I needed water. I needed something to ground me, something normal. A young flight attendant, I think her name was Sarah, made her way toward me. She was holding on to the seatbacks as she walked down the aisle. Her smile was professional, but her eyes were too wide. She saw the look on my face. "Just some wind over the peaks, sir," she said, her voice a little too high. "Can I get you something? Just a glass of water, please, if you can." She nodded and turned to go to the rear galley, which was right behind me. Just as she did, the plane hit another violent pocket. This time it was a downward drop, a plunge so sudden it lifted me out of my seat against the belt. The flight attendant stumbled. She didn't fall, but I saw genuine panic flash across her face for a fraction of a second before her training kicked back in. She steadied herself and looked back at me. "You know what, sir?" she said. It's probably best if we all stay seated for now, crew included. I'll be back when this smooths out. She quickly moved to her jump seat in the back and strapped herself in. Tight. That's when my traveler's anxiety turned into real fear. Staff don't sit for normal turbulence. They sit when there's risk. I pulled out my phone. We still had intermittent Wi-Fi signal. My project? My presentation? It suddenly seemed so stupidly small. I opened my messages. I saw the picture of Elena and my 7-year-old daughter, Sophia. They were in the park, smiling, ice cream on their faces. I typed quickly. The words felt heavy on my thumbs. Awful weather. Land in 40. Love you. I hit send. She replied almost immediately. The little typing bubble popped up and vanished. Love you too. Be safe. Are you okay? I wanted to type no. I wanted to type I'm scared. I wanted to tell her the flight attendant looked terrified and the plane felt like a toy in a giant's hand. But I'm the controller. I'm the man who fixes things. I'm the father. I'm the husband. So I lied again. All good, just bumpy. Talk. Soon. I slid the phone into my jacket pocket. Not the seat pocket. Always my jacket. A habit. I leaned back and gripped the armrests. The plastic was cold and sweaty. I counted backward from 100. It's a trick I use to calm down in meetings. 99. 98. The plane tilted sharply to the left. 97. A sound. A sound I had never heard before in my life. It wasn't a thump. It wasn't a rattle. It was a bang. Like a cannon. But not from the sky. A cannon made of metal. It came from the right side of the plane. And then, the world fell away. The bang was instantaneous and deafening. It wasn't a dull thud. It was a violent, metallic crack, as if someone had detonated an explosive right next to my head. The entire fuselage shuddered with a force that rattled my teeth. The man beside me screamed, a high-pitched, choked sound. He wasn't the only one. The cabin instantly filled with a cacophony of short, sharp cries and gasps of shock. Immediately after the bang, the plane lurched, and I don't mean a gentle banking turn. It dropped hard to the right. The motion was so violent that I felt my body lift from the seat, held down only by the seatbelt strap digging painfully into my hip. My head slammed hard against the window panel. For a second, I saw blurry stars, and panic mixed with the sharp, throbbing pain. What was that? Oh my God, what was that? A woman in the row ahead of me was yelling. All my architect training, my need for logic vanished. My reptile brain took over. There was only one word: fire. I frantically pressed my face to the cold window, expecting to see flames pouring from the right engine. But I saw nothing. Just the same impenetrable gray wall of the storm cloud. Then, the lights went out. The cabin was plunged into near-total darkness, broken only by the dim blue emergency lights on the floor, which barely illuminated the chaos. The steady, reassuring drone of the engines. It was wrong. It was gone. Not completely. But the powerful roar from the right side was replaced by a terrifying, hollow, whooshing sound. It was the sound of wind tearing past metal at 500 miles per hour. And we were still tilted, still falling to the right. I could feel gravity pulling me toward the aisle. "Oh God!" the flight attendant Sarah cried out from her jump seat in the back. Her voice wasn't professional anymore. It was pure, unfiltered terror. A second later, the chaos became official. A metallic thwack echoed above our heads, and the ceiling panels snapped open. Yellow oxygen masks dropped down in front of us, dangling and swinging erratically like dead spiders on strings. That was the moment the panic in the cabin truly broke. Until that second, it was confusion. It was an incident. People were screaming, but it was a scream of surprise. When those masks fell, it became a scream of dread. The sound in the cabin changed. It became deeper, more guttural. It was the sound of 120. People realizing, all at the same time, that this was not turbulence. This was it. My first reaction was denial. This isn't happening. This doesn't happen on short domestic flights. This happens in movies. I grabbed the mask dangling in front of me. The elastic was tangled. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the yellow plastic cup. The rebreather bag wasn't inflating. Pull the mask to start the flow of oxygen, I remembered from some safety demonstration I'd only ever half listened to. I yanked on it so hard I nearly ripped the tubing from the ceiling. I pressed the cup to my face. It smelled sterile, like plastic and rubber. I took a deep, gasping breath. The air was thin and cold and tasted like chemicals. The plane gave another brutal shudder, this time an upward jolt, and then dropped again. My stomach felt like it was in my throat. My laptop, which had fallen to the floor, slid out from under the seat in front of me and vanished down the tilted aisle. Looked at the man next to me. He was fumbling with his mask, his shaking hands just batting it against his chin. His eyes were squeezed shut. He wasn't screaming. He was praying, repeating, "Please no, please no, please no," over and over. So fast the words blurred together. The plane stabilized slightly. It stopped dropping so hard to the right, but the sound was worse than the vibration. The left engine was still going. I could hear it faintly, but it was straining, whining. The plane didn't feel like it was flying anymore. It felt like it was gliding, like a heavy stone thrown through the air, and we were going down. I could feel it in my ears. The pressure was changing fast. The cabin was an auditory nightmare. The depressurization alarm was a high-pitched, incessant beep, beep, beep from above. People were openly weeping. A child somewhere in the front was screaming for its mother. And over all of it, the wind. A deafening roar that filled the vacuum left by the dead engine. That's when my controller brain tried to come back. What happened? A bird? Ice? I remembered the storm. Ice. The ice must have shattered the engine turbine. If one engine fails, the other can fly the plane, I told myself, repeating a mantra I'd read somewhere. They can land on one engine. We'll be okay. We'll land in Denver. It'll be a hell of a story to tell. I closed my eyes, trying to believe my own lie. Then, the second engine died. There was no explosion this time. It just gave up. The faint, straining whine from the left engine sputtered, coughed, vibrated the whole fuselage for one agonizing second, and then went silent. And the world stopped. The silence that followed was the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. The roar of the wind was still there, a hollow howl. But without the thrust of the engines, it was an absolute, dead silence. The beep, beep, beep of the alarm suddenly seemed 10 times louder. We were no longer gliding. We were falling. People knew it. The screaming stopped. It was replaced by a sepulchral hush, broken only by muffled sobs. It was the quiet of absolute acceptance. It was the quiet of 120 people waiting to hit the ground. It was in that silence that I looked out the window again. We had dropped out of the bottom of the cloud layer, and there was nothing below us but white and gray. Mountains. We were inside the mountains. Snow-covered peaks and sheer black rock faces were streaming past the window, so close, I felt I could reach out and touch them. So close I could see individual trees. We were too low. We were fatally low. My heart stopped. All the air left my lungs. The oxygen mask felt useless. All the work, the project, my company, my house, it all evaporated. There was only one image in my mind, Elena's face, Sophia's smile. I'm sorry, I thought. I'm so sorry. And then, the intercom crackled to life with a burst of static that sliced through the quiet. The static crackle from the intercom was so sharp it made me flinch. For a fraction of a second, I thought, he's going to tell us what to do. He's going to tell us it's okay. I was wrong. The voice that came through the speakers was not the calm, reassuring captain from 15 minutes ago. This was the voice of a man who was already dead. It was high-pitched, shredded by static and pure, undiluted terror. Mayday! 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 Total engine failure. We've lost both. We're not going to make it. There was a pause. Just a half-second intake of breath, and then the words that will be burned into my memory until the day I die. We're aimed at the mountain. Brace for impact. Brace, brace, brace. The transmission ended not with a click, but with a sound of distortion, as if the microphone had been thrown against the dashboard. The silence that followed the pilot's scream was worse than the silence of the failed engines. The cabin, which had been quiet with stunned acceptance, erupted. It was no longer screaming. It was a single guttural sound, a primal wail from 120 throats that understood the next 10 seconds would be their last. My body moved before my brain did. My controller architect self tried one last time to fix the unfixable. Brace, the safety card. I was supposed to put my head down, hands over my head. It seemed so pointless, so absurd. We were a metal tube about to hit a granite wall at hundreds of miles per hour. I fumbled with my seatbelt, pulling it so tight it felt like it was cutting me in half. I tried to push my small carry-on bag under the seat in front of me, but my hands were useless, numb claws. I gave up. I looked out the window. The pilot was wrong. We weren't aimed at a mountain. We were aimed at the mountain. It was all I could see. The world was no longer sky and earth. It was just a vertical wall of black rock and white snow. It wasn't getting closer in the distance. It was expanding. It was filling my entire field of vision, rushing toward us at an impossible speed. I could see the texture of the ice. I could see the dark lines of crevices. Time warped. Everything slowed down. I turned my head. The man next to me wasn't praying anymore. He was just staring straight ahead, his eyes wide and completely blank, his mouth open in a silent "oh." He had already left. In the back, I saw the flight attendant, Sarah. She was in her jump seat, strapped in so tightly her face was pale. But she was doing her job. Even in the face of certain death, her training was running the show. She was shouting, but I couldn't hear her words over the wind and the screaming. She was just mouthing the command, over and over, her head down, her hands locked behind her neck. "Brace, brace, brace." I tried to copy her. I bent over, pushing my chest against my thighs. I locked my fingers behind my head, protecting my neck. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Elena, Sophia, I'm sorry. I love you." And then the sound began. It started as a low groan, a vibration. In the floor, it was the sound of the plane's belly scraping the tops of the pine trees on the ridge. It was a high-pitched screech that I felt in my bones. The plane shuddered, and then came the first impact. It was not a crash. It was an explosion. A bone-shattering, deafening boom that felt like the hand of God slamming the plane from below. The entire aircraft was jolted with a force so extreme that my head, despite my braced arms, was whipped back and slammed into the headrest. I tasted blood. The screaming in the cabin stopped. It was instantly cut off, but the sound of destruction had just begun. Immediately after the first impact came the most horrifying sound I will ever hear. The sound of the plane ripping in two. It was a catastrophic, tearing shriek of metal, like a giant zipper being undone, starting from the front and tearing its way back. The floor beneath my feet buckled, twisted, and then gave way. I felt a sudden violent lurch as the tail section, my section, broke free. The G-forces were unbelievable. I was no longer moving with the plane. I was in a separate object, a 20-ton piece of debris, tumbling through the air. I was thrown violently against my seatbelt as the tail section, free from the main fuselage, began to spin. My eyes snapped open. I had to see. For one horrifying, crystal-clear second, I saw it. Through the mangled opening where the rest of the plane used to be, I saw the main fuselage. It was still moving, cartwheeling across the top of the mountain ridge. It slammed into a wall of rock, and in absolute, terrifying silence, it erupted. A massive, blossoming fireball of orange and black smoke that lit up the gray sky. I saw it all from above, because my section, the tail, had been thrown clear of the summit, and we were falling again. We were falling into the ravine I had seen just moments before. The spin was sickening. I saw glimpses of sky, then rock, then sky, then the white, endless powder of the ravine floor. Rushing up to meet us. This wasn't a crash. It was a second fall. I didn't even have time to scream. The final impact was not the hard, explosive stop I expected. It was a sequence of brutal, crushing decelerations. The tail section hit the deep snow not with a crash, but with a thump that drove the air from my lungs. The entire structure groaned as it plowed through the powder, the snow acting as a massive, unforgiving cushion. The metal screamed as it compressed. Seats tore loose from their moorings and flew past my head. Luggage from the overhead bins exploded, filling the air with clothes and debris. My world became a violent, suffocating chaos of white snow, blue upholstery, spinning metal, and screaming wind. The section sledded, scraped, and tumbled for what felt like an eternity, and then, with one last bone-jarring crunch, it stopped. It was over. There was silence. A complete, total, ringing silence. I was upside down, or sideways. I couldn't tell. My head was pressed against something cold and wet. Snow. I tried to breathe, but my chest wouldn't move. This is it, I thought. This is death. And then everything went black. The blackness wasn't empty. It was filled with sound. A high-pitched, thin whistling. It was the only thing in the universe. I drifted in it, weightless. It was almost peaceful. Then came the cold. It started in my hands and feet, a dull ache but quickly spread. It was a piercing, biting cold that felt like needles sinking into my skin. The cold was what brought the pain. My head was a universe of throbbing agony. My chest felt like it had been crushed by a building. My left leg was on fire, a sharp, searing pain just below the knee. I forced my eyes open. It was still dark, not the blackness of unconsciousness, but a dim gray twilight. Snow was falling gently, dusting my face. My first coherent thought was one of utter confusion. Why is it snowing inside? I tried to move, and my world tilted. I wasn't sitting up. I wasn't lying down. I was on my side, still strapped tightly into my seat, which was itself tilted at a 45-degree angle. The seat next to me, where the praying man had been, was gone. It was just missing. In its place was a jagged hole leading to the outside. My face was pressed against the curved wall of the fuselage, which was now my floor. Snow had piled up against my cheek. The whistling sound wasn't in my head. It was the wind. It was howling, a mournful, terrifying sound as it ripped through the torn metal shell that surrounded me. I was alive. That realization hit me with the force of a second impact. I had survived. I had hit a mountain and I was alive. I was breathing. The air was thin and freezing, each breath a painful gasp that burned my lungs. But I was breathing. I tried to push myself up, but a fresh wave of agony shot through my chest and leg, and I collapsed back against the wall, gasping. I was pinned. My left leg was trapped under the twisted metal of the seat in front of me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, a vice-like grip that sent lightning bolts of pain up my thigh every time I tensed. I lay there for a minute, maybe 10. Time had no meaning. I just listened to the wind and felt the snow collect on my jacket. My mind was a fog, refusing to process what had happened. The scream, the mountain, the tearing metal. It played back in my head, not as a memory, but as a dream I was trying to shake off. "Hello?" I whispered. My voice was a dry croak. The sound was stolen by the wind instantly. "Hello!" I yelled, louder this time. Only the wind answered. I was in the tail section. I knew that. My last row seat. The plane had ripped in two. I had seen the front section, the main part, hit the ridge. I had seen the fireball. I had to see where I was. With a groan, I used my good arm to push myself as upright as my trapped leg would allow. My head swam. Nausea roiled in my stomach. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting back the urge to pass out again. "Don't pass out, Mark. You pass out, you die." I opened my eyes again and looked. The tail section was a mangled tube of metal, ripped open like a tin can. The rear galley, which had been directly behind my row, was now above me. The entire section had come to rest on its right side, half buried in a deep drift of snow. Where the rest of the plane should have been, there was just a gaping circular maw of twisted aluminum, framing the dark, snowy sky. I was in a ravine, a deep one. The walls on either side were steep inclines of snow and dark rock, rising up into the gloom. And then I saw it. High above me, maybe 500 yards away, up on the ridge I had seen through the window, was the fire. It was a distant, flickering orange beacon in the swirling gray snow. A funeral pyre. It was the main fuselage. The rest of the plane. The other 110 people. The man who was praying. The woman in front of me. The captain who had screamed. I stared at it, mesmerized. It was the only light in this entire frozen, broken world. It was so far away. It might as well have been on the moon. The terrible, isolating truth settled on me. We hadn't crashed together. I was not in the main wreckage. I was here, in this broken piece of tailfin, thrown clear, and buried in a dark, forgotten cleft in the mountain. The rescuers, if they came, would go to the fire. They would go to the beacon. They would never think to look down here. They would never find me. New kind of cold washed over me, a cold that had nothing to do with the snow. It was the cold of utter hopelessness. I was going to die here. I had survived the unsurvivable, only to be given a slower, colder death. I was going to freeze to death, trapped in my seat, staring at the distant fire of the plane that was supposed to be my coffin. I thought of Elena. I thought of Sophia. My last text message. "All good. Just bumpy. Talk soon." The lie felt like acid in my throat. They would see the news. They would see the crash site on TV, the smoking wreckage on the mountain. They would mourn me. They would never know I had lived for hours longer, alone in the dark. The sheer, crushing despair was so heavy it felt physical. It would be so easy to just stop, to close my eyes, to let the cold do its work, to let the blackness take me back. It would be peaceful. No more pain, no more fear. I closed my eyes. I felt the snow on my eyelashes. Just sleep. No. A spark ignited somewhere, deep inside my frozen chest. It was small, but it was hot. It was rage. I was not cargo. I was not a victim. I was Mark Bishop. I was an architect. I built things. I solved problems. I was not going to die in a metal can, buried in the snow. My daughter deserved more than a father who gave up. My wife deserved more than a husband who just slept. The project, the presentation, my fears, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the next breath, and the one after that. I opened my eyes. The fire on the mountain was still burning. Okay, I said, this time to myself. The wind tore the word away. Okay, first problem, the leg. I have to get my leg free. I looked down at the twisted mass of metal and upholstery that held me prisoner. I couldn't see my foot. I could only feel the relentless, grinding pressure. I put my hands on the metal bar trapping my shin. It was ice cold. It didn't budge. I tried again, pulling with all the strength I had. A scream tore from my throat as the bar shifted, grinding against bone. The world went white with pain. I collapsed back, gasping, tears of agony freezing on my cheeks. I was alive, and I was trapped. And somewhere, very close by, I heard a sound that wasn't the wind. It was a moan. It wasn't the wind. I froze, holding my breath, straining my ears against the constant howl. The sound came again. It was low, guttural, and thick with pain. A human sound. Hello? My voice cracked. Is someone there? Hello? A moment of silence. Just the whistling air. Then, fainter this time. Help. Me. It was a woman's voice. It was coming from deeper inside the wreckage, from the part of the tail that was still mostly intact, behind the galley wall. I was not alone. That single thought changed the chemical balance in my brain. The fog of despair evaporated, replaced by a violent, electric surge of adrenaline. It was so powerful it eclipsed the pain. I was not alone. There was someone else, and she needed help. I'm here, I yelled, my voice ripping from my throat. I'm coming! Just hold on! But I wasn't coming. I was still pinned. The rage I'd felt moments before returned, but now it had a target. Not the mountain, not the plane. The target was the piece of twisted metal digging into my leg. I looked down at it again. It was a section of the seat frame from the row in front, bent into a V shape, and the point of the V was what held me. Pulling was useless. I wasn't strong enough to bend it back. I was an architect. I didn't solve problems with brute force. I solved them with leverage. I looked around me in the dim gray light. Debris everywhere. Smashed carry-on bags. Pieces of the overhead bin. A service cart from the galley was lying on its side, wheels spinning uselessly in the air. I needed a bar, a lever. My eyes landed on the armrest of my own seat. It was mangled, partially torn from the chair. I grabbed it with both hands. It was cold, so cold it felt like it was burning my skin. I twisted it. The metal groaned in protest. Come on, I grunted, throwing my entire body weight into the twist. My injured leg screamed as the movement jostled the metal pinning it. I roared, a sound of pure agony and effort, and with a sharp crack, the aluminum armrest broke free in my hands. It was about 2 feet long, hollow, but strong. A perfect lever. I didn't waste a second. I jammed the broken end of the armrest into the V shape of the metal trap. I found a solid piece of the floor to use as a fulcrum. I put all my weight on the end of the bar. The metal groaned. The pressure on my leg increased, a blinding white-hot agony. I thought the bone was going to snap. I screamed again, pushing down, my vision tunneling. And then, with a dull thunk, the metal bar shifted. Only an inch. But it was enough. I yanked my leg free. The feeling was a sickening release of pressure, followed by a wet, warm sensation. I didn't look. I couldn't. I knew it was bad. I'm coming, I yelled again, to the darkness. Please. It's so cold. The voice was weaker. I rolled from my mangled seat and onto the floor of the fuselage, which was really the side wall. The snow was deep. Maybe a foot of powder had blown in through the opening. As soon as my body weight landed on my left leg, it collapsed. The pain was absolute. I couldn't stand. I would have to crawl. I began to drag myself, using my elbows and my one good leg, over the wreckage. I climbed over broken seats, shoving aside suitcases and torn pieces of clothing. The wind was a physical presence, trying to push me back, blasting my face with ice and snow. "Where are you?" I shouted. "Here. I'm stuck." I rounded the corner of the ruined galley. The service carts were jammed against the ceiling, which was now the wall, and behind them, I saw her. She was just a shape in the dark, buried under a pile of collapsed seats from the row in front of ours. All I could see was a tangle of dark hair, a pale hand, and the sleeve of a bright red jacket. She was pinned, crushed from the waist down. Her eyes were open, wide with terror. She couldn't have been more than 22. A college kid. "Okay," I said, my voice shaking from the exertion and the cold. "My name is Mark. I'm going to get you out." "I can't feel my legs," she whispered. Her lips were already turning blue. "I can't feel anything. That's the cold, just the cold. What's your name?" I had to keep her talking, keep her awake. "Anna," she whispered. "My name is Anna." "Okay, Anna. We're getting out of here." I looked at the pile of seats pinning her. It was a tangled mess, but the same principle applied. I wasn't strong enough to lift it. I needed to use the lever. "This is going to hurt," I warned her. I jammed the aluminum bar under the main support of the seat, pressing on her chest. I pushed. It didn't move. The angle was wrong. I was too high. I had to get lower. I lay flat on my stomach in the snow, the wetness instantly seeping through my shirt. The pain in my own leg was a distant roaring engine. I wedged my shoulder under the lever for more support and pushed upward with my back and my good leg. 1, 2, 3, push! The metal shrieked. The pile shifted. It moved half a foot. Anna screamed, a sound so shrill it cut through the wind. I'm sorry, I gasped. "I have to. Again." I repositioned the bar. "Ready? Push." I threw every ounce of my will, my rage, my fear for my own family, into that single movement. The seat structure groaned, bent, and then snapped, folding upward and away from her. She was free. I grabbed the collar of her red jacket and pulled. She was light. I dragged her backward, out from under the wreckage, until we were both in the relatively open area by my broken seat. She was breathing, a series of short, rattling gasps. Her eyes were rolling back. "Anna, stay with me, look at me." I shook her, maybe too hard. "Stay with me." Her eyes focused on mine. "It's," she stammered, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form words. "It's everyone." She didn't have to finish the sentence. I knew what she was asking. I looked past her, into the dark, mangled tube of the tail section. It was maybe 6 rows, 24 passengers, plus the flight attendant. "Sarah," I called out, remembering the flight attendant. "Hello, is anyone else here?" Silence. The wind howled through the wreckage. The distant fire on the ridgeline burned, a tiny, mocking star. I crawled deeper into the wreckage, past where I'd found Anna. The other seats were crushed. Some were missing entirely, likely ripped out during the fall. There was no one, no movement, no other sound. Just the wind and the snow, which was already filling the empty spaces, covering the dead. I crawled back to Anna. She was watching me, her eyes full of a question I didn't know how to answer. I didn't have to say anything. She saw it on my face. Her face crumpled, and she began to sob. Not loud, just a silent, hopeless shaking. I had survived. I had pulled her from the wreckage, and we were completely, totally alone. I sat down in the snow next to her, my back against the broken wall of the fuselage. I was bleeding. She was in shock. The temperature was dropping, fast. The storm was getting worse. "We're alive, Anna," I said, trying to make my voice sound certain, trying to make myself believe it. "We are alive." I grabbed a thin airline blanket from a seat that was still intact. It was practically useless, thin as paper. I draped it over her shoulders. I looked at my own leg. My pant leg was soaked in dark, warm blood. The first immediate fight was over. We were free, but the real hell was just beginning. We had survived the fall. Now we had to survive the night. We were alone. The realization settled over us, heavier and colder than the snow that was now drifting through the gash in the fuselage. The adrenaline from freeing Anna vanished, and the pain in my leg, which had been a distant roar, came screaming back. It was a sharp, wet, and rhythmic agony. Anna was sobbing beside me, a desperate, hopeless sound that the wind snatched away. I watched her, my own breath pluming in front of my face in thick, white clouds. The temperature was dropping. I didn't need a thermometer to know it. I could feel the air getting heavier, sharper. It hurt to breathe. "Okay," I said, my voice sounding thin. "Okay, Anna. We have to move. We have to get out of the wind." She just shook her head, her eyes squeezed shut. "I can't. I can't feel my legs, Mark. I can't feel anything." I looked down at where she had been crushed. Was it a spinal injury? Was it just the shock? The cold? It didn't matter. The result was the same. She couldn't move, and I couldn't carry her. I could barely move myself. "All right," I said, forcing my architect's brain to restart. The problem-solving part. First, assess the structure. Then, stop the bleeding. Then, improve the shelter. I looked at my own leg. My jeans were soaked through with a dark, almost black stain. In the dim gray light, I could see steam rising from it. My own body heat, my own life, was pumping out into the snow. If I didn't stop it, I'd be dead in an hour. I crawled on my belly, dragging my useless leg behind me, back toward the piles of debris. My lever, the broken armrest, was still lying where I'd dropped it. I grabbed it. Then I searched the luggage. A hard-shell suitcase had burst open, spilling its contents. T-shirts, jeans, toiletries, and a thick wool knit sweater. I grabbed the sweater. I crawled back to Anna. She was quiet now, her shivers becoming more violent. "I have to fix my leg, Anna. I'll be right here, just keep talking to me. Okay? Tell me where you're from." Portland," she chattered. "Oregon." "Okay, good. Keep talking." I gritted my teeth and ripped the wool sweater into a long strip. I pushed aside my torn, bloody jeans. The gash was deep. A 4-inch slice of raw, exposed muscle, weeping blood. The metal had missed the bone, I thought, but it was bad. I pressed the wad of wool directly into the wound. I screamed, a muffled sound into the snow. The pain was blinding. It felt like stuffing a hot coal into my leg. But I held it there, pressing down with all my weight. What are you doing?" Anna whispered. "Pressure," I gasped. "Have to stop. The bleeding." I wrapped the rest of the wool strip around my leg, over the wad, as tightly as I could. It wasn't enough. I needed more pressure. I took my metal lever, the armrest, and slipped it under the bandage. I twisted it like a tourniquet. The world went white. I almost passed out. The bar dug into my skin, cinching the bandage so tight my entire lower leg went numb. But when I looked, the dark blood had slowed to a weak ooze. It was the best I could do. "Okay," I panted, my body drenched in a cold sweat. "Okay. Step 1. I looked at our shelter. The tail section was a broken tube lying on its side. The wind was whipping through the main opening, the hole where we had torn away from the plane, and blasting us directly. It was a wind tunnel. We wouldn't last 2 hours. "I have to build a wall," I said, more to myself than to Anna. What?" "A wall. To block the wind." I started crawling again, dragging my now bandaged leg. The pain was a dull, heavy, throbbing thing, but the sharp agony was gone. I began grabbing debris, smashed suitcases, torn out pieces of seating, sections of the overhead bin, anything solid. I dragged them, one by one, to the large circular opening. I started at the bottom, wedging a suitcase against a twisted piece of the floor, then another next to it. It was like building with the worst possible blocks. They were heavy. They were slick with snow. Every movement sent jolts of fire up my leg. But the architect in me understood the physics. I angled the pieces, leaning them against the solid outer wall, using the wind's own force to hold them in place. I wedged smaller bags into the gaps. It took me almost an hour of crawling through the snow, of heaving, of grunting and collapsing in pain. By the time I was done, I was hypothermic, shaking so badly I could barely think. But I had built a wall. It was a pathetic, ugly thing. a pile of frozen luggage and broken plastic, but it blocked the main force of the wind. The howling outside was muffled, replaced by a low groan. The air inside, our metal cave, was suddenly still and quiet, terribly quiet. I crawled back to Anna. She was pale as the snow. Her lips were a deep, dark blue. Her eyes were half closed, and her shivers had stopped. This was worse, far worse. Shivering is the body's last attempt to generate heat. When it stops, you're in the final stage. Anna. I shook her shoulder. Anna. Her head rolled weakly. It's tired, she mumbled. Just sleep. So warm. No, Anna, no. This was the lie the cold tells you. It makes you feel warm just before it kills you. You can't sleep. Do you hear me? You cannot sleep. I grabbed her, and my own pain was forgotten. I pulled her by the jacket, dragging her to the most sheltered corner of our new room. I sat down, my back against the fuselage wall, and pulled her against my chest. She was limp, a dead weight. I positioned her so her back was against my front. I was the new wall. I grabbed the 2 thin airline blankets I'd found. They were useless individually, but I wrapped them around both of us, creating a single shared cocoon. I pulled her head back against my shoulder. I could feel the deathly cold of her skin, even through my jacket. Talk to me, Anna, I commanded, my voice hoarse. You're studying to be a nurse, right? You told me that. Where are you in school? Oh, OSU, she whispered, her breath fogging in front of her. Okay, OSU, good school. Tell me about it. Tell me about your worst class. My own body was screaming. My leg was a block of frozen, throbbing wood. My arms were numb. My head was light. I wanted to sleep too. I wanted to close my eyes and let the blackness take me. But I had her life in my hands, and I had the image of Sophia's face in my mind. Come on, Anna. Talk. We have to keep talking. So we did. We spent that first, endless night huddled together in a tomb of ice and aluminum, 2 broken people sharing one last spark of body heat. The darkness was absolute. The storm raged outside, a living thing, clawing at our flimsy wall. The metal of the fuselage groaned and popped around us, settling in the snow, a symphony of destruction. And above it all, high on the ridge, I could still see it through a small crack in our wall. The fire, the main wreckage. It was a tiny, flickering orange dot. It was our only hope, and as the hours passed, I watched it burn. I watched it get smaller. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than the snow, that if that fire went out before the sun came up, we would never be found. The night was a race, and we were losing. The night didn't end. It just changed color. The impenetrable roaring black faded to a thin, bruised purple, and then slowly to a blinding, sterile white. The snow stopped. The wind died down to a faint, high-altitude whisper. The silence that fell over the ravine was heavier than the wreckage, more terrifying than the storm. I unwrapped my arms from Anna. The movement was stiff, painful. It felt like peeling frozen canvas off a block of ice. I looked at her. She was alive. Her chest was moving, but the breaths were shallow, almost imperceptible. Anna, I said. My voice was a dry rasp. It's morning. We made it. Her head rolled on my shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open, but they were milky, unfocused. She wasn't seeing me. She was seeing something else. Mom, she whispered, her lips cracked and blue. Is the car here? We're going to be late. A cold dread, separate from the freezing air, settled in my stomach. She was delirious. The hypothermia wasn't just in her limbs. It was deep in her brain, rewriting her reality. No, Anna, I said, shaking her gently. We're still on the mountain. You're okay. We're in the plane. It's so cold, she mumbled, not to me, but to the air. She didn't shiver. That was the worst part. I was cold too. My entire body felt like a single solid block of ice. My bandaged leg was a club of senseless, heavy pain. I knew I had to move, or my good leg would stiffen up, and I'd be just as useless as she was. I had to see. I crawled on my elbows, dragging my dead leg, past the pathetic wall of luggage we had built. I pushed one of the suitcases aside and looked out. The world was shockingly bright. The sun was hitting the peaks far above us, reflecting a light so pure and white it felt like needles in my eyes. It was beautiful, and it was deadly. I looked up to the ridge, where our hope had been. The fire was gone. where there had been a flickering orange beacon, our only connection to the world. There was now just a black, ugly scar against the snow, a smudge of soot and melted metal half covered by the night's storm. It was over. I slid back into the shelter, the last bit of hope draining out of me. The fire had burned all night. It had been a signal to the entire world, and no one had come. I sat down in the snow next to Anna. The reality of it, the true, final reality, settled on me. We were two people in a metal can, buried in a ravine, 500 yards from a crash site that was now invisible. Anna was rambling, her voice a faint murmur. She was talking to her mother about a dog, about being late for class. She was dying, and I was sitting here, waiting for my turn. The rage came back, but it was different. It wasn't the hot rage of the fight. It was a cold, quiet, calculating fury. I was an architect. I don't wait for things to happen. I make them happen. Think, Mark, think. The rescuers, the NTSB, the Air Force. They weren't looking for us. They were looking for the plane. They would follow the flight plan. They would scan the mountains. Eventually, today, tomorrow, they would spot the wreckage on the ridge. They would go there, to the black scar. What was in the cockpit? The black box, and the ELT, the emergency locator transmitter. If that transmitter had somehow survived the fireball, a huge astronomical if, it would be pinging. But even if it was silent, the search would be focused there. That's where they would fly the helicopters. That's where they would send in the search teams on foot. They would never look down here. We were ghosts. We were invisible, buried in a piece of shrapnel in a forgotten cleft. The logic was brutal, simple, and unavoidable. Staying here was death. Going there, going up, was a chance. I looked out the opening again, up at the ridge. It was 500 yards, but it was nearly vertical. A sheer slope of deep powdery snow, ice, and jagged rock. I looked down. At my leg, I couldn't walk. I could barely crawl. I looked at Anna. She couldn't be moved. The equation was the most horrifying calculation of my life. I couldn't take her with me. I would have to leave her. I tried to justify it, my mind racing. I had to justify it. If I go up, I can signal them. I can yell. I can point. I can tell them she's down here. If I stay, we both die. She's dying anyway. But to leave her, to leave this young woman who had survived the crash, who I had pulled from the wreckage, to leave her to die alone while I tried to save myself, it felt like a betrayal. It felt like murder. Anna, I said, my voice thick. Anna, listen to me. I shook her shoulder, more firmly this time. Her eyes fluttered, and for a half second I thought I saw a flicker of lucidity, a spark of the real Anna. Mark, she whispered. Yes. Listen to me. The fire is out. No one is coming for us here. Do you understand? They're going to the top of the ridge, where the rest of the plane is. I have to go up there. She stared at me, her eyes struggling to focus. She didn't understand the words, just the terror in my voice. I have to go, Anna. I have to get help. I was pleading with her, pleading for her permission to abandon her. I'm going to bring them back for you. Do you understand? I'll bring them back. She just looked at me for a long, silent moment. Then she nodded. A tiny, slow, almost imperceptible nod. Bring back a blanket, she whispered. Warm one. I felt something crack in my chest. I will, I said, the lie catching in my throat. I promise. I prepared. It was a pathetic inventory. I crawled through the wreckage again. I found a half-empty bottle of water in the side pocket of a backpack. It was frozen solid, a useless club of ice. I found a crushed box of granola bars. They were frozen as hard as rocks. I shoved them into my jacket pocket anyway. I needed my tools. I untwisted the metal armrest, my tourniquet, just enough to let a searing pins and needles wave of blood flow back into my lower leg. The bleeding had slowed, the wound frozen shut. I retied the bandage loosely. I took the armrest. It was my ice axe. I needed something for the snow. It was deep, powdery. I would sink. I saw it, sticking out of the galley debris. A bright red plastic food service tray. It was flimsy, but it was wide. A makeshift snowshoe. An anchor. I crawled over to Anna one last time. She seemed to be asleep, her breathing as faint as a bird's. I took the one good blanket we had. The other was a stiff, frozen sheet of cloth, and tucked it as tightly as I could around her body, covering her face. "I'll be back," I whispered. I knew I would either be dead on that slope or I would be rescued. I would never make it back down here on my own. This was goodbye. I crawled to the opening of our shelter, to the flimsy wall of luggage. I pushed one of the suitcases aside. The morning air hit me like a physical blow. It was thin, razor-sharp, and blindingly bright. The silence of the mountain was absolute, a vast, empty cathedral of snow and rock. I pulled myself out of the wreckage and into the open. I looked up. The 500-yard slope was not a hill. It was a cliff, a sheer wall of white, broken only by the black teeth of exposed rock. I stood on my one good leg, using the metal bar as a cane. My injured leg was a dead, useless weight. I took the red food tray in my other hand. My plan was simple. I would throw the tray, get it to land flat, and use it as an anchor in the deep snow. I would pull myself up to it. Then I'd dig my ice axe in, re-anchor myself, and throw the tray again. It was the stupidest, most desperate plan I'd ever had. It was the only plan. I looked back one last time at the black, ragged hole in the snowdrift that held Anna. Then I turned to the mountain. I jammed the metal bar into the snowpack above me. It held. I took my first step, pulling myself up with one arm and one leg, out of the grave and onto the slope. The mountain was a wall of blinding white. The sun, reflecting off the fresh powder, was so bright it was a physical weight pressing against my eyes. I was exposed, a tiny dark speck on an endless vertical field of snow. The climb was a brutal, stupid, and slow equation. I would take the red food tray and heave it as high as I could, up the 45-degree slope. It would slide back, but eventually it would settle, digging a shallow anchor in the deep powder. Then I would take the metal armrest, my ice axe, and jam it into the snowpack near my chest. I would test it, putting my full weight on it. Then, using my one good leg and my arms, I would pull. It was a crawl. Not even a crawl. It was a lurch. I would drag my useless, frozen left leg behind me like a sack of rocks. The wound had stopped bleeding, but the entire limb was a dead, heavy thing. I would pull myself up 3 feet until my chest was level with the food tray. Then I would rest, my lungs screaming for air that wasn't there. The altitude was a thief, stealing my breath, making my head spin. I would lie there, panting, steam fogging the snow in front of my face. Then I would retrieve the tray, heave it up again, jam the bar, and pull. 3 feet, rest. 3 feet, rest. Time ceased to have meaning. There was no night or day. There was only the next 3 feet. My mind shut down. I couldn't think about Anna, alone in the dark. The guilt was too heavy. It would have made me slide back down the mountain. I couldn't think about Elena or Sophia. The hope was too sharp. It would have broken me. My world shrank to the red tray, the silver bar, and the patch of snow directly in front of my face. I was an architect. This was just a problem of physics, leverage and load. My hands, even in my thin gloves, were raw. The cold had numbed them, but I could feel the wetness. They were bleeding, scraped raw from gripping the frozen metal bar. After what felt like a lifetime, I hit the rock. The snowpack thinned, giving way to a sheer 20-foot section of black, icy granite. The tray was useless. It wouldn't grip. It just skittered off the rock and slid back down past me, disappearing into the white. I was stuck. I looked down. I couldn't see the ravine. I couldn't see the wreckage I'd left. I was perhaps 100 yards up. I couldn't go up. I couldn't go down. I was going to die here, pinned to the side of a cliff, like a specimen in a display case. I looked at the rock face. There was a crack, a thin fissure running vertically. I took the metal armrest, the end of which was already jagged from when I'd torn it from the seat. I jammed it into the crack, not as an anchor but as a pick. I twisted it. It held. I pulled myself up, my good leg scrabbling for purchase on the slick, icy stone. I was no longer a man. I was a wounded animal. I jammed the pick higher. I pulled. My bloody fingers clawed at the rock, searching for any tiny imperfection, any ridge that would hold my weight. My dead leg swung free, a pendulum of meat, bumping uselessly against the cliff. I don't know how long it took, but with a final, desperate heave that tore a scream from my throat, I grabbed the top of the ridge. It was a cornice of snow. I dug my fingers in, My ice pick found purchase, and I dragged my broken body over the edge. I collapsed onto the flat, wind-swept summit, sobbing, gasping, coughing in the thin air. I had made it. I was at the main crash site. I rolled onto my back and lay there, letting the world spin. When the spinning stopped, I forced myself to sit up. The outline had been right. It was a scene of total, absolute devastation. But it was not the chaotic mess I had imagined. It was quiet, still. The fire was out. The storm had covered most of it in a fresh blanket of white like a shroud. The plane was not a plane. It was a long, black scar, a groove in the mountain, 200 yards long where the fuselage had scraped itself into nothing. The air smelled of kerosene, of melted plastic, and of something else. Something sweet and metallic. The smell of the end. There were no bodies. Not that I could see. There was just debris. A single intact row of seats, 3 across, sitting perfectly upright on the snow, facing a backdrop of the entire mountain range, as if waiting for a show. Luggage had been thrown everywhere, burst open, their contents, brightly colored clothes, laptops, children's toys, frozen into the snow. A cold, methodical calm settled over me. I had come here for a reason, the beacon, the ELT. I got to my good foot and, using the bar as a crutch, I began to stumble through the wreckage. "Hello?" I called out, my voice thin and lost in the vastness. "Is anyone here?" Only the silence answered. I was the only one. The tail section. The absurd 1,000,000-to-1 physics of it. We were the only part that had been thrown clear. Everyone else had been in the fireball, limped toward the front of the scorch mark, where the cockpit should have been. It was gone. The plane had hit nose first. The front third of the aircraft had simply atomized, vaporized against the granite. There would be no ELT. There would be no radio. I had left Anna. I had climbed this mountain for nothing. I felt the last of my strength, the last of my will, the last of my cold rage, just dissolve. It flowed out of me, leaving a hollow, empty shell. I was done. I slumped down against a twisted piece of the wing. I was so tired. The sun was warm on my face. It felt nice. The snow was soft. I thought of Anna. I'd left her to die for this, for a frozen graveyard. "I'm sorry, Anna," I whispered. "I'm sorry, Elena." My eyes drifted shut. It was so easy to let go. I was just about to fall, to let the warm, white fog take me, and I saw it, sticking out of the snow, not 10 feet from me. It was a box. A bright, unmistakable safety orange box, dented, scarred, but intact. The black box, the flight data recorder. I had found it. I stared at it. It was just a box. It wasn't a beacon. It wasn't a radio. It was just a recorder, a silent witness. It wouldn't save me. I laughed, a dry, cracked sound. The irony was brutal. I had found the one thing that could tell the world what happened, but not that I was still here. I lay my head back against the metal. It was over. I let the darkness pull me under. Whump, 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 whump. The sound was a vibration first, felt in my chest before I heard it. A deep, rhythmic thudding that didn't belong to the mountain. My eyes snapped open. The blue sky was empty. Whump, 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 whump. It was getting louder. It was coming from below me, from the other side of the ridge. I dragged myself, crawling on my elbows, to the edge of the cliff I had just climbed. I looked down. A bright red helicopter. It was hovering, not over me, but over the ravine. It was hovering directly over the spot where I had left the wreckage of the tail. They hadn't seen me. They hadn't seen the main crash site yet. They were following the signal. Not my signal. The black box. The box I was leaning against. It was a beacon. It had been pinging its location the entire time. I watched, stunned, as a figure in an orange jumpsuit descended on a cable. He disappeared into the black hole in the snow where I had left Anna. A minute later, the cable grew taut. They were pulling someone up. A small figure, wrapped in a blanket, secured to the rescuer. A flash of bright red. Her jacket. They had her. They had Anna. I was screaming, but no sound was coming out. I was crying, but the tears were freezing instantly. I was still going to die. They had what they came for. They didn't know I was here. They were going to leave. "No!" I roared, the sound ripping my throat. "No! I'm here! I'm up here!" I stood up on my one good leg, waving my arms, a frantic broken puppet on the mountaintop. The helicopter began to rise. It cleared the ridge. It turned. It was massive, loud, a thundering, impossible machine of life. And it saw me. The helicopter stopped, hovering maybe 50 yards away. I could see the pilot. I could see the rescuer in the open door, the one holding Anna. He looked at me, his visor down. He pointed, right at me. I fell to my knees in the snow. They weren't. He leaving. I dropped my metal bar. I had no more problems to solve. I had no more walls to build. I lay down in the snow, looked at the blue sky, and for the first time in 2 days, I let go. The world came back in fragments, sound and light, disconnected. The thundering whump, whump, whump of the helicopter blades was so loud it vibrated in my teeth. I remember a mask being pressed to my face, the plastic smelling like rubber. The air was rich, thick, and warm. It felt impossibly good. I remember hands on me, professional, fast, cutting away my frozen, bloody clothes. I remember a sharp sting in my arm. And then, nothing. The next time, I woke. The first thing I registered was the warmth. It was an oppressive, heavy, suffocating warmth. After 2 days of existing in a world of ice, the heated air of the hospital room felt like a physical weight on my skin. The silence was gone, replaced by a steady, rhythmic beep, beep, beep. It was a machine that meant I was alive. My eyes cracked open. The light was dim, not the blinding, hostile white of the snow, but a soft, artificial yellow. I was in a bed. The sheets were clean. I could feel the soft, starched cotton against my chin. I tried to speak, but my throat was a desert. A dry, rasping sound came out. A woman in scrubs moved into my vision. A nurse. She had kind eyes. "Mr. Bishop, Mark, you're in a hospital in Denver. You're safe. Your wife is here. She's just outside. Elena." The name hit me with the force of a physical blow. Elena. Sophia. I had thought of them as a memory, a thing I had lost. Now they were here. I tried to sit up. A lightning bolt of pain shot from my left leg so intense it ripped a gasp from my throat. I fell back against the pillows, panting. The nurse was at my side. "Easy, easy. You're okay. You've been through a lot." I looked down. My left leg was a massive, swollen, bandaged HE-refs, invalid URL removed. Style, text decoration, none. Color, inherit. Thing, elevated on a pillow. But I couldn't feel my feet, either of them. There was no pain, no cold, just nothing. A dead, empty space where my feet should be. The panic that hit me was worse than the fall. "My feet," I croaked. I can't feel my feet. Where are my feet?" "The doctor will be in to talk to you, Mark. You have very severe frostbite. We're doing everything we can." Her clinical kindness was a new kind of terror. Doing everything we can. That's what you say when it's too late. I had climbed that mountain. I had survived that fall, only to lose my feet to a hospital bed. A few minutes later, the surgeon came in. He was a tall man with a tired face. He looked at my chart, then at me. "Mr. Bishop, I'm Dr. Aris. I was on the team that received you from the flight crew. I need you to understand what a close thing this was." I just stared at him, waiting for the axe to fall. "Your core temperature was 85 degrees. Your body had essentially shut down. The frostbite on your hands and both feet was profound. The tissue was frozen solid." He paused. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Another 30 minutes on that mountain, and we wouldn't be talking about your feet. We'd be talking without them. But you got here just in time. We've been rewarming you slowly. The tissue is responding. There's pain, which is a good sign. We think we can save all of it. You are an incredibly, incredibly lucky man." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It came out as a sob. I would walk. I would be whole. "Now," the doctor said, his tone softening. "There's one more thing. There's a young woman, Anna. She's a few doors down. Severe hypothermia and a complex spinal fracture. But she's alive, and she's awake. She told us what you did, how you built the shelter, how you kept her from falling asleep, how you left to get help. Is she—" I couldn't finish. "She's going to need surgery, a lot of it. But her doctors are optimistic. You saved her life, Mark. You're climbing that ridge. It's the only reason they knew to look in that ravine. The only reason they found her alive. The guilt of leaving her, the weight that had been crushing me, it just evaporated. My gamble had paid off. My stupid, desperate plan had worked. Elena came in after that. The reunion was a blur of tears and quiet, broken words. I held her hand, the warmth of her skin feeling alien and wonderful. I was alive. I was home. For 2 days, the world was a simple place. Pain medication, sleeping, and Elena's hand in mine. Then the men in suits came. They were from the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. They were polite, quiet, and carried a briefcase. They weren't doctors. They were, in their own way, architects. They were here to look at the blueprint of a failure. "Mr. Bishop," the older one said, his voice soft, "we know this is difficult, but you are, in a very real sense, the human black box. The recorder we found, your black box. It led us to you, but we need to hear what you heard, what you felt." I closed my eyes. I was back in the cabin. The smell of plastic and ozone. The bang. I told them everything. The jolt. The loss of the right engine. The silence. The masks falling. My lie to Elena. "And the pilot, Mr. Bishop?" the investigator asked, leaning forward slightly. "What did you hear from the cockpit?" The room was quiet. The beeping of my heart monitor seemed to get louder. I had to say the words. I had to make it real. "He screamed," I whispered. My throat was tight. It wasn't an announcement. He was terrified. He said, "Mayday, mayday, we've lost both. We're not going to make it." I took a shaky breath. I could feel the plane falling. His last words were, "We're aimed at the mountain. Brace for impact." The investigators wrote. They didn't look up. "That's what I heard," I said. Then the line went dead. The older investigator nodded slowly. He looked at his partner, then back at me. "Mr. Bishop, what you heard, that was the last 10 seconds. The data from the recorder, it shows the pilots were fighting that plane for 3 full minutes after the second engine flamed out." I stared at him. "What, 3 minutes? But we were just silent." "Exactly. They had no thrust. They were a 100-ton glider in a blizzard, inside a box canyon. According to the data, they were trying to clear the ridge you climbed. They were pulling the nose up, trying to stretch the glide, trying to find any pocket of updraft. For 3 minutes, they knew. They knew they were too low, and they fought it, silently, until the very last second, when that mountain filled their windshield. I didn't know what to say. The pilot's scream hadn't been a moment of sudden panic. It had been a confession. It was the sound of a man who had fought a 3-minute battle in absolute silence, and had just, in that final second, lost. The investigators thanked me. They closed their notebooks. They left. I was alone again, in the sterile, beeping quiet. The physical trauma was healing. The frostbite would fade. But this new knowledge, this was a different kind of wound. The wound of knowing. The shared, silent terror of those 3 minutes. The pilot's fight. Anna's whisper. The weight of being the only one who could tell the story. The crash wasn't over. I was realizing it would never be over. I was discharged from the hospital 3 weeks later. The doctors called my recovery remarkable. They used words like unprecedented and miraculous. I didn't feel miraculous. I felt heavy. I felt like a man who had walked into a storm and come out as something else, something forged in ice and metal. My feet were saved, but they would never be the same. The nerves were damaged. Every step was a negotiation with the floor, a reminder of the cold. My hands were scarred from the metal bar, the skin pink and new. I would never be an architect who just drew plans. I was now an architect who knew, intimately, what happened when physics failed. The last person I saw before I left the hospital was Anna. I was in a wheelchair. She was flat on her back in a complex halo brace. Her spinal surgery had been a success, they said, but the road ahead of her was long. Years. I rolled up to her bedside. She looked small against the white pillows. "You came," she whispered. Her voice was stronger. "I told you I'd come back," I said. It was the only promise I'd managed to keep. We sat in silence for a long time. There was nothing to say. We were the only 2 members of a club no one ever wanted to join. We were the ones who had fallen into the ravine and climbed out. "The red jacket," I said finally. "That's what I saw when I found you. The color. And that's what the rescue pilot saw. Your jacket." She smiled. a tiny pained movement of her lips. My mom told me to wear it. She said it was too bright. We didn't hug. We couldn't. I just reached out and put my scarred hand on her arm. You fight, Anna. You hear me? You keep fighting. You too, Mark, she said. 2 days later, I was home. Elena had tried to make everything normal. The house smelled like cinnamon. Sophia's toys were in the living room. But it was all a set, a play. I was an actor who didn't know his lines. I would sit on the sofa for hours, just staring. The normal sounds of my life, the refrigerator humming, the mail truck stopping outside, Sophia laughing at a cartoon, all felt impossibly loud and fragile. For a week, I didn't go into my office, the room at the end of the hall, the room where the Summit project lived. It was the room where the old Mark had spent every waking moment, sacrificing his family, his health, his sanity for a meeting. It was the room that had put me on that plane. One Tuesday morning, I woke up before the sun. The pain in my feet was a dull throb. I got up, my limp pronounced in the quiet house. I walked down the hall and opened the door. My computer was asleep, its power light breathing softly in the dark. I sat in my expensive ergonomic chair. I woke the computer, and there it was, my desktop, the file, Summit Project, Final V12.pdf, my presentation, the blueprints for the hotel, the thing that was going to save my company, the project of my life. I opened it, the renderings loaded, beautiful clean lines of steel and glass set against a perfect, computer-generated mountain, a mountain with no scars, no wind, no death. I stared at the screen, at the product of 6 months of my life. It was brilliant, it was precise, and it meant absolutely nothing. I thought about the pilot's scream. I thought about the NTSB investigator. 3 minutes. They had fought silently for 3 minutes, knowing they were going to die, trying to get every last inch of altitude, every last second of life, out of a dead machine. And what had I been doing with my life? I had been bracing. My whole life, I had been bracing for impact, bracing for financial failure, bracing for the next deadline, bracing for the project to collapse. I was so busy bracing for a crash that I was missing the entire flight. The pilot had fought for 3 minutes. I had wasted 3 years. I moved the mouse cursor over the file. I thought about the money. I thought about the clients. I thought about the failure. And then I thought about the red food tray, the stupidest, most desperate tool. I took a deep breath. I right-clicked the file. I moved the cursor down. I clicked delete. A small box popped up. Are you sure you want to permanently delete? Summit Project Final V12 PDF? Yes, I whispered to the empty room. I clicked the button. The file vanished. A wave of, not sadness, not failure, a wave of lightness washed over me. The project wasn't my life. It was just a job. I had survived. My firm could fail. It didn't matter. I could build something else, or I could do something else entirely. I had been given back my time. I heard a small sound at the door. It was Sophia. She was standing there in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, holding her stuffed bear. "What are you doing, Daddy?" she asked, her voice sleepy. Before the crash, I would have said, "Working, honey. Go back to bed. Daddy's busy." I turned my chair to face her. I really looked at her. Her messy hair, her small hands. She was real. She was physics that worked. She was the structure that mattered. "I'm finished," I said. I held out my arms. She ran to me and climbed into my lap, careful of my leg. She burrowed her face into my chest. I held her, and for the first time since I'd been back, I wasn't in the plane. I wasn't on the mountain. I was just here, in this chair, in this room, holding my daughter. I was finally present. My name is Mark Bishop. They call me a survivor. They say I'm the human black box. But the truth is, I'm just a man who finally understands what the pilot knew in those last 3 minutes. You don't brace. You don't wait for the impact. You fight for every second. You fly the plane until the very end. And you never, ever close your eyes. If you want to hear more unbelievable stories of survival, of the fight for every last second, subscribe to the channel. Because life is not about bracing for the fall, it's about what you do in the air.